Hello, team. It's time for the Daily Detangler. All right, experiencing shared understanding. And this is the last step in our process we've been following. We had an activity to really do some real-time co-creation. And I'm the anchor leg here of the relay. So the work has gone from activator modeling it to clarity, developing a checklist and running it by Catalyst. And then here is what I see in doing that. I'm talking about the situation, the action, and then what we've produced. And invoking our principles, a lot of what we're going to talk about here is about the experience that's created when we co-create. And we'll talk a little bit about what communication looks like, and then a lot about trust in the process of being able to create something from nothing. So I like to start with this idea of communication as a model. And this comes from our scientific methods underpinnings with communication theory. And the thing that we're exploring here is Catalyst asked us to build a process for really underpinning or getting to the basics of creating shared understanding in a virtual setting. And what he asked us to do is to create some outputs around that to help our team create shared understanding and work together on our virtual meetings. So something simple, something small, yet can have great impact when everybody's on the same page. And the reason why that impact can happen is what we encode as a group, what gets transmitted back and forth between group members, and what we decode as a group matters. And the more structured the encoding, the more clear the communication, and the more we're on the same page with our decoding, the better the chances of co-creation and collaboration, right? It makes sense, yet there's a lot of noise that can get in the way. So the goal of this relay was to create something that helps us engage in this idea of communication and create some shared understanding. And shared understanding is driven by communication, and shared understanding really powers collaboration, especially in a asynchronous world and a digital world. The way information is structured, how I'm communicating now, what have I put into encoding, how am I transmitting, am I clear, and are you able to decode, and have I thought through those components? Shared understanding is critical, especially in the complex problem solving that we're engaging in. If it's a back and forth where everybody's perspective is valued, and more importantly, everybody's perspective is required to tackle a challenge, communication becomes even more critical. But there's a lot of things that get into the way of creating shared understanding. I'm going to call them poisons, because they're poisons that can really not only slow down communication, they can kill it, stifle it, and literally outright kill it. The first poison I'm going to call the poison of knowledge. The poison is there. Somebody shows up into a session and into a meeting and like, I know everything. I know a lot. What do you think when they show up that way? Yeah, so what? I know a lot too. And now our communication is off on a wrong foot, and we're going to spend our time not collaborating, but trying to figure out who knows the most, right? It's human nature. That's why it's a poison. Another poison is the poison of solutioning, showing up into a situation and saying, well, you should just insert here. How do you like it when people show up into a collaboration that way and into a meeting that way? It's simple. You just ... I've had to develop techniques for that. One is a no shoulding. Don't should on people. People don't like to be shoulded on. You may have heard me say that. Stop shoulding. Yet shoulding is all over LinkedIn. We're taught to should on people. And then what technique on the receiving end? When people should on me, what do? Well, instead of just being quiet, I say I'll factor that in. But what does factoring it in really mean? I don't know. It makes the shoulder feel good though, because they're going to be factored in. And what I choose to do with that is up to me. But if I don't, what do I do if that poison shows up? The poison of experience. Oh, I've already been here. I already figured that out. That's nice. That's great. Have that ever happened to you? Oh, we've already seen this before. Here's the answer, the poison of solutioning. But then backing it up with, well, at the prior company and in my prior life, and here's what I did before. How does that make you feel? The poison of priorities. Hey, I don't have time. Well, gee whiz, thanks for the help. If we're going to be collaborating, this idea of I don't have time and the prioritization that we go through and how we choose to prioritize can actually poison the communication and the collaboration. And that pressure of priorities that other people place on the discussion can actually kill the communication. And the poison of bias. We have a whole microsite on bias. Biases are all over business. It's human nature. Our brain is wired to take shortcuts, and that can be dangerous, especially when people believe that salespeople are coin operated or salespeople are dumb and stupid. It's prevalent throughout marketing and even sales. And because of this bias, inspection and inspecting, mandating, and how does that make you feel if I come at you and say you're coin operated? I already know your type. I already know how you are. You have ADD. You can't complete a sentence. You're golfing all the time. How would you like it if people did that to you, right? So these poisons show up in our communication and can create a lot of noise. That noise is not only in a back and forth and maybe missing the point or talking past each other, but also barriers to processing and decoding. The decoding of what's being sent is nearly impossible if these poisons are out of control. And these poisons create tangles in brains of people who are trying to process information and trying to process where people are coming from. Because we're not leading with logic or scientific method, if you will, or structure, we're leading with ourselves in these poisons. These poisons are all about me, are all about the individual, not the receiver. So these tangles show up as, well, gee, if you're going to show up with the poison of knowledge, I'm not going to fight that. I'm not going to put myself out there and get into a battle. If somebody's got the solutioning poison, I'm not going to be able to work with them. I can't just do what they say. The poison of experience is, I'm not seeing how this is going to work out. I'm not seeing how I'm going to be able to help this person if they've got all this experience. The poison of priority shows up as the tangle of, hey, this isn't my problem, not my rodeo, not my circus. And the poison of bias is, I'm never going to be able to meet this expectation. This person thinks I'm an idiot. I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going to spend the time. I'm not going to do it to meet them anyway. So that leads to, what do you do about it? And the activity that Catalyst had us do was a pretty simple activity. And it seems basic and rudimentary. And it has to do with this idea of, how do we show up to meetings and how do we collaborate and have a discussion in the meetings that we're in. And what he had us do was follow a simple approach, approach to play back. Somebody's speaking, we're in the meeting. Let's say something like, hey, can I replay back what I'm hearing? the person will say, yeah, sure. Okay, I'm going to use my own words because I have to be able to represent your point of view. Is that okay? Absolutely. And what I heard was, and that person confirms or corrects. So what's happening? Why is Catalyst doing this? Well, first of all, I've seen him use it a ton. So why, he's learned this from experience, but what is it? What is happening here? Well, if you pause this back and forth exchange, what's happening? Well, one, the speaker is saying stuff and wants to be heard. Anybody who's speaking wants to be heard. Now, as the recipient, the decoder on the right, what's happening over there? Well, that person, you in this case, is actively listening. And by asking two simple questions, or actually, this idea of, hey, can I replay it back? What does it do? It confirms that we're actively listening and that we're going to take some accountability for what we're hearing. And two, it seeks to clarify from the sender, the speaker in this case, what's being sent. That way we can try to get to shared understanding. When that person, the you, relays information and says, here's what I've heard, what's going to happen there? Their perspective, their filters, their ability to listen, their own decoding will be encoded, and they'll share it back for the speaker to confirm or to build on or to tweak or maybe disagree with, depending on what's replayed back. In that process of the going back and forth there, something's happening. What is that? What is that happening? And, one of the things that when I first saw this, I'm like, okay, blah, blah, blah. Can I replay it back? Sure. But then I said, well, one, I've seen Catalyst use this a lot, and two, clients eat it up. And then three, I've put my neck out there, quote unquote. I've done this before and it worked. But when he sent this out and said, hey, I want to follow this process, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so kindergarten, this is so basic. Why do we, and it immediately triggered, I have a client who their problem was their meetings, and they built HR built a 35-page, hey, we're going to have a meeting. And so you need to follow a 35-page how to have a meeting training. It's just crazy. So they're chasing symptoms there. And why are the symptoms of a meeting, being chased? Is because the meetings are terrible. Well, why are the meetings terrible? What's happening in the meetings, right? And when you look at this list here, this little picture here on the left, what's happening there? And if you've been in meetings where it's just a blah, 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 and nobody's confirming anything, it's just an information dump, and then everybody moves on. What's really happening is there's shared understanding in a one-way dialogue, like most meetings are, right? So there's different ways to interpret an unsuccessful meeting. There's different ways to interpret a meeting gone wrong or an invaluable meeting. And when I thought about this activity, it's a couple weeks long, and we're going through this process of let's unpack it, let's try it with each other, and let's build some tools around it. Seeing activator model it, trying it myself with others. It was interesting when I tried it. I hadn't tried it in a while. The first time I tried it, I really struggled repeating back what I heard, which told me I wasn't actively listening. So that process of attempting to replay it, there's a lot that happens there. So what Clarity did was say, okay, well, what's happening here? What is happening in this exchange, and what works there? And he came up with this list. So I put some little check marks on it, and I reworded it slightly, and I added one. So I added one to his. I'll call that out. But here's what he said: this process, from a clarity perspective, helps make things clear because it helps make it lightweight and more collaborative. Also, this back and forth exchange, it's not order taking. It's coming to an understanding by seeing the same thing. Because of this approach, participants have space to bring something to the discussion. Participants don't become defensive and angry. They leave with more shared understanding. And this back and forth, this process of confirming helps participants stay in the moment and creates a wow factor for participants. That's great. You know, that wow factor, what is it? Some sort of spark. What's the spark? Shared understanding. That's great, right? That's what we want. It drives momentum and action together, where people are together. And then here's the one that I added. I think there's value in repeating this back for the other observers of the meeting or participants of the meeting, depending on how well they're actively listening. But if they're just observing, our ears naturally perk up to the recap, or, you know, our cynic kicks in and says, okay, how well is this person going to really be able to recap? Let's correct him. Even though I wasn't listening, let's see how he screws it up. Or, oh, gee, I missed that whole thing. Here comes a recap. Let me really pay attention. So the observers and the participants in this can actually benefit from the recap too. And then, you know, it creates meaning, which leads to enthusiasm and openness. And then Clarity said, if it's done well, it's extremely energizing. So this simple tool, this idea of let's go to the basics, this idea of let's model what works, following this relay process to tackle a communication exchange. What has it done? Well, it's created this tool, it's created this checklist, and it's created this approach to tackle some, you know, conversation poisons, I'm calling them, you know, and this is a simple tool. So what did we learn in this process? Well, we learned that leaning into, I learned, I don't know if you learned it. I learned it, that communication is bidirectional, right? We're leaning into the scientific methods. It's proven fact. Also, for collaboration to happen, it requires communication. You can't really collaborate without communication. That's if you're not communicating, you're not collaborating. There are 5 communication poisons that I see, and those poisons lead to tangles in participants. And that those tangles created by the conversation poisons create a barrier to shared understanding. The replay technique, I'll call it, right? The replay technique, that approach is the antidote to those poisons. And we can help detangle ourselves and our participants by following this simple technique, which can pave the way to collaboration. And people who use that technique well, they prove that they're actively listening, which in turn builds trust and respect and creates a flywheel of momentum, as Clarity put in his checklist. So that's what I'm seeing with regard to why is Catalyst asking us to do something so simple, something so basic, something so kindergarten as let's follow this technique. And then what I see is why it matters, and what I've learned in putting it together and trying it and actually trying to use this on my experiences, this idea of trusting the process. I've tried to use this with our team, and I've tried to use it externally. And every time I've used it, it's created some sort of spark. It's also helped me reflect on my own ability to consume and decode, right? Am I actively decoding? Am I actively listening? And am I engaged? And that's what getting to that simple visual has done for me this week, as we've explored this idea of creating experiences to create shared understanding. So that's been today's Daily Detangler. Love your feedback on this, especially the concept of communication poisons, and I look forward to hearing back from you. Take care.